Well, good evening once again, everybody. We are live here on the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page. We're here on YouTube live as well. It's Syracuse Basketball Postgame presented by Krause Health, alongside my friend and colleague, Mike Curtis. I'm Brent Axe. Mike, I didn't think we'd find anything more exciting in the last 24 hours than the season finale of The Mandalorian. But Syracuse-Buffalo sure gave it a run. An overtime game at the Carrier Dome. And Syracuse wins 107-96. This was a game at one point that Syracuse trailed by 16 points, a game that Buffalo looked in full control of for most of the way. But as Syracuse kind of went through the second half, kind of found itself defensively, made a lineup switch. Kadari Richmond plays a lot more in the second half for Joe Girard. Alan Griffin makes what Jim Boeheim described is one of the greatest plays he's ever seen in the Carrier Dome, a block that would have given Buffalo an easy win in regulation, but Griffin tracks it down, swats it away, and Syracuse goes into overtime where they do not trail. Mike, what a fun game to watch, and to see Syracuse kind of chip away at that lead. I'm going to go through all the stats here, but really one of the most amazing things, Syracuse scored 107 points. They only hit 3 3-pointers in the entire game. That is not something you see every day.
Not at all. And you're right about it giving the Mandalorian season finale a run for its money. If you watch, definitely go check that out. But this was the best game of the season for the Orange, in my opinion. They were able to win and score in triple digits with, like you said, with only making 3 3-pointers. And Allen with that game-saving block, I mean, you would have thought it was reminiscent to 2016 when LeBron James came out of nowhere and blocked.
It reminded me of that play. It really did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just came out of the Buffalo post-game Zoom, which with Coach Agnes Thorpe, I'm sorry. And he definitely gave props to Alan Griffin. He said from his angle, the block was clean. He said he did a good job of tracking it down, and it was a clean block, and you got to give him all the credit for it. And he also said there's a few tidbits that I got from the press conference. One, he didn't expect Richmond to play the majority of those minutes. He honestly expected the starting point guard, Joe Girard, to play majority of those minutes. But once Boeheim, I think he took him out at probably the 15 mark of the second half. He saw how he was contributing to the team just with his athleticism, his defensive presence, and his ability to get to the rim. Also, the goal was to take them off the 3-point line, and they managed to do that. They missed a lot of threes. They only made 3. So
incredible to see Kadari Richmond come in and take command of the team, driving inside, making passes. We'll go over the stats here shortly. Joe Girard, I don't think he played the last 19 minutes and 38 seconds of game action. That's not an official stat, but it was pretty close to that. And look, Joe had a nice little bounce back in Syracuse's prior 2 games. In the first 4 games of the season, he had scored 38 points. He had 38 points in those 2 games, had 6 steals against Northeastern on Wednesday. But this game, Buffalo was driving right by him and Buddy Boeheim, frankly, a lot. Jim had to make a change defensively. For a lot of this game, Buffalo was in control. They were going inside. They were going outside. They just had this game in hand. And then, as you heard the coach say there, they started to wear down a little bit. Syracuse chipped away, particularly with Quincy Guerrier inside. And Mike, Uncle Brent loves to say it a lot. Free throws matter. Syracuse had 32 free throws in this game. So what do you say we go over a couple more stats? You guys are going crazy in the comments. I love it. You guys will react to you here shortly, but let's throw out a couple of stats from this game. Quincy Guerrier, 27 points and 11 rebounds. He has just been a monster this year for Syracuse, and that continued today. Also had a big 3-pointer down the stretch for Syracuse. He was 9 of 12 at the free throw line. Really big there for Syracuse. It's hard to believe that Alan Griffin actually struggled for about, I'd say, most of the first half, part of the second half before he really got it going. 24 points on the day, 10 rebounds. He only hits a 1 3-pointer, but it was a big one down the stretch. It was 7 of 8 at the free throw line, as we mentioned, the huge block at the end of the game. Marek Dolezaj was terrific again for Syracuse. He had 19 points and 8 rebounds. Now, Marek had a play with about 13 seconds to go inside. Ball got taken away from him. Maybe a foul could have been called there, and that led to the play that Alan Griffin blocked on the other end for Buffalo. Buddy Boeheim ends up with 22 points on the day. He really had to shoot a lot to get there. He was 8 of 24 on the day, 0 of 5 from three-point range, and that just is the startling number for Syracuse. Only 3 3-pointers in this game. We mentioned Kadari Richmond. He comes in with 13 points on the day, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 blocks, a couple of steals. He plays 32 minutes in this game. Girard ends up playing just 16 minutes in this game. So I saw Jim Boeheim say in the press conference, Mike, that, Joe struggled. Kadari had to play, but Joe will be back. In what form he'll be back is going to be interesting to see, because clearly this team reacted better to Kadari in this situation. And just to give you a couple more numbers from this one, Syracuse shot 36 of 75 overall. That's 48%. Buffalo was 39 of 79. That's 49%. We mentioned Syracuse just 3 of 19 from three-point range. Buffalo 9 of 22. In the first half of this game, Buffalo was 6 of 14 from three-point range. They end up 9 of 22. At halftime, they were shooting 51% in this game, and they end up shooting 49% in this game. So pretty consistent there, but they only got to the free throw line 13 times. They go 9 of 13 there. Syracuse 32 of 42 on the day. That's 76%. Syracuse out-rebounded Buffalo 46 to 43. And as you go through a couple of other key stats here, Syracuse really caught up in the assist department. 19 assists for the Orange, 22 for Buffalo. The Bulls turned it over 17 times. Buffalo used a lot more of its bench, despite the great game by Kadari Richmond, who had most of the bench points for Syracuse. They outscored the Orange there 42 to 13 bench points. Syracuse had 15 points off those turnovers. That was big for the Orange. Points in the paint, dead even at 58. Shows you how much the Orange had to go in the paint, of course, with the three-point shots not falling tonight. And Syracuse ends up beating Buffalo in second chance points, 16 to 11. So those are the overall numbers, Mike. But boy, it really comes down to big players making big plays in big spots, and none bigger than that Alan Griffin block. And it just surged Syracuse into the second half. But it's a lot of little things that added up too in the second half that Syracuse needed to do. They had to go into the press a little bit. They had to switch the lineup, as we mentioned, with Richmond. And they just kept chipping away. And, Mike, you kept looking up at the scoreboard saying, okay, there's 5 minutes to go. Syracuse trails by 6. There's 4 minutes to go. They trail by 3. And, time was on their side in this one.
Yeah, I think early on in the second half when they were down 16, I don't think anyone thought that they would come back and eventually win in overtime and score 100 points at that. One thing that really stood out to me was Buddy Boeheim's effectiveness inside the paint. That three-point shot was not going. He was 0 for 5, didn't make anything from beyond the three-point arc. So he had to take all of his shots inside. And he hit that turnaround mid-range jumper time and time again. And you can tell it's something that he's been working on. And that's definitely beneficial when he's not able to get that three-point shot going. He can step in from the mid-range and hit that fall away.
By the way, Syracuse had missed, if you go back to the Northeastern game, before Quincy Guerrier hit that three-pointer, they had missed 23 straight threes going back to Northeastern. They were 2 of 18 overall in that game and missed 23 straight before that. So that's obviously an issue. Mike, it's interesting because this team's got three-point shooters. I mean, Girard, Boeheim, Griffin, Guerrier has shown he can step back and hit a couple now. This team's got the shooters, but the past couple of games, they just haven't been falling. And this comes to a week ago today. They hit 16 threes in a game against Boston College. So I don't know. Go figure. Sometimes it's just not falling. But, man, Quincy Guerrier, we are going to run out of ways to describe how well this guy is playing right now. He goes into Hulk mode down in the paint, and not a lot of teams are going to be able to stop that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think midway through the game, I was asking the question to myself, like, what type of identity does Syracuse have right now? Because when they're on, they're hitting the three-point shot, they look unbeatable. When they're not, they look really bad, and they've got to find other ways to score. But it seems like you said, Quincy Guerrier has been that consistent force all season. He's been the best player on the floor.
He really has. And, the other thing that Syracuse has to work on is its defense overall. But for a good part of this game, Mike, Buffalo just was a step ahead. They were in transition. You mentioned how their coach noted in the postgame that they started to fade a little bit down the second half. They didn't expect Kadari Richmond to play the minutes that he did. But this was just a confident team. There was a swagger with Buffalo. They were talking a lot of trash, with no fans in the stands. The ACC network microphones certainly are picking up a lot of trash talk from Buffalo. This Buffalo team, not the same team, and Nate Oates has moved on and not a lot of the same players there. But look, Buffalo came to the Dome 2 years ago and beat Syracuse when the Bulls were making that run to the NCAA tournament. They were in the top 15 in the country. The way they play this is how they've played under no matter who's coaching there. If it's Bobby Hurley or Nate Oates or whoever is coaching this team, they play hard, they come at you, they're aggressive and they're confident. But for Syracuse to make some adjustments the way that they did in the second half, a lot of people think that Jim would not make that move to a freshman like Kadari Richmond, but how could you not at this point? There is just speaking of a confidence and a swagger in this kid's game. And he's just a better defender than Joe. He takes up more space in the zone. So what I'm starting to see, Mike, is, look, Kadari might not start, but Dion Waiters never started a game at Syracuse. He did okay. And I think Kadari is going to kind of find himself in that role. It's undeniable now that he's got to play, and he's got to play minutes, especially when Joe is struggling. But Joe can still score and still hit some threes and do some things for you. I mentioned he had 6 steals the other night. It's a good problem to have. But it's going to be interesting to see how Boeheim balances this out going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Going forward, it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of manages how they play during against those good ACC teams, against Duke, against North Carolina. Who are you going to go to when your team needs it the most? Tonight, it was Richmond. A couple games ago, it was Girard. It's going to be, like you said, interesting to see how he balances that. And one thing I did want to point out was Rochester native Jonathan Williams. From the start of the game, he was playing impressively well. He got in foul trouble, but he finished with 19 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists. He really wanted to have a good game here at the Dome.
Who I was impressed with, too, and it's curious to see how many players Syracuse will run into in the ACC that play this way. Josh Mbala was terrific for Buffalo in this game. He ends up with 27 points. He goes 11 of 18 from the field in 31 minutes, got to the free throw line a few times. Just quick on the ball, Mike. Like they just got him, decisive, went to the rim, and kind of knew where to go with it. And that's why, as you noted, look, when Syracuse was down by 16, the reason I didn't think they were going to get back in this game, honestly, was Buffalo was doing it on both ends. It was either Mbala inside, going up quick, putting Syracuse on their heels defensively, or they were hitting threes. But what started to happen was in the second half, a lot more of those outside shots started to go down. A few possessions where Syracuse was scoring on the other end and matching Buffalo. It just goes to show you they chipped away here. But two things Syracuse has to be concerned about, because this is their last non-conference game, essentially, Mike. I'm an old school guy. I don't think of Georgetown as a non-conference game. Technically, it's going to be. They're going to kind of wedge it in there in the middle of January during ACC play. I think Georgetown's almost in its own category. So I think technically today was the last non-conference game, right? So with ACC play starting against Notre Dame next week and right on through, Syracuse has some defensive issues. They've got to figure out when it's best to have Joe or Kadari in there for that purpose. And they're in a shooting rut right now. We've seen what this team can do when they get hot. But frankly, at Boston College's defense that day was terrible. If you're not making shots that day with the open shots that they gave you all night long, I mean, come on, what are we doing here? That was a glorified practice. So I still think 3-point shooting overall is somewhat of a concern because you have so many good shooters that just aren't hitting them right now. And I wonder how they're going to do against better defenses night in and night out in league play.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, they got Notre Dame on Tuesday. And then I think this will benefit them, the Christmas break. 7 days off until they come back against Wake Forest on the 30th. And that is the game that Barama Sidibe is scheduled to return. So we'll probably see a even different lineup out there, depending on if Jim Boeheim starts him or not. But I think it'll definitely be interesting to see how he how he reintegrates himself back with the team and what role he'll play going forward.
And not soon enough, Mike. Look, Marek has done a terrific job inside. Today, I think he drew about 4 different offensive fouls on Buffalo's part, 3 or 4 at the least. He's grabbing rebounds. He had a great transition dunk down the stretch. He had the opportunity late in the game, had the ball taken away from him, but he's been consistent there. He's holding down the fort at the center position, but they need Barama back in there so they can work off each other. Marek's one of the best passers on the team. He's becoming one of the best passers, frankly, in the ACC at this point. How Barama plays coming back from that knee injury. He was back at the Dome tonight. He's moving around a little bit. He's slowly but surely getting there. It's going to take him a game or two, I would think, to get back in the flow, but good timing on that one for him. And that will allow Syracuse to kind of space out a little bit more. But man, Quincy Guerrier, it just doesn't matter who's in there around him. He's just been a beast. So Syracuse has to just improve on those 2 things that we mentioned, and then we'll see how this team goes. But Mike, this was a game where they showed some grit. They showed some toughness. They recovered from being in a 16-point hole. These are things you can't practice. These are things that Jim Boeheim can talk about until the cows come home. But until you're in this spot, seeing how they react, who are the leaders, who steps up, and for Alan Griffin to step up a day after he didn't score, a game after he didn't score, I should say, and was even struggling in this one. Jim was pretty hard on him after the Wednesday game, saying, you can't let a bad offensive game get you off your game. It's on both ends of the floor. And it was his first pointed comments at Allen since he had come over. Of course, he's the Illinois transfer and had played pretty well before that. So this is one of those gut check games, and Syracuse passed the test in this one.
Yeah, one thing I do want to point out about Alan Griffin, he had a beautiful tip slam in the second half, and he hit a 3-pointer after that. But one thing that really stood out to me was in the second half, late in the second half, I believe, when he dove for the ball. He was probably 6 feet away from the ball, and he was still able to get close. He did not show that type of effort in the game against Northeastern, and you could tell he really wanted this game.
Now, you do have to wonder here. We mentioned that Girard, certainly against Boston College last week and in Northeastern, combined 38 points. So does he start kind of playing now? The worst thing you can get into as a shooter and get into as a player, especially with Boeheim, and Girard ends up with just 2 points on the night, goes 1 of 6 from the field, 0 of 3 from 3-point range. The worst thing you can have is, you start to miss a few shots and then you start glancing over this way. You start looking over at the bench. When is Jim going to kind of tap him on the shoulder and play out? Joe is a confident player. Shooters are going to shoot. He's aggressive. I think his shot selection can be better at times. He tries to shoot his way out of trouble. But we can't get around here, Mike. And boy, if I could add it all up through the years, when it comes to playing time, 85% of the time, Jim Boeheim's answer on that's going to be defense. Mm-hmm. And Kadari Richmond's just a better defender. So that being said, Jim is pretty confident in Joe. Just said it at the press conference before we came on that Joe's going to be back. It's going to take a lot for Jim to have his confidence shaken in Joe. It's going to have to be a real pattern here. But that being said, what's the clock? What's the internal clock in Joe's head or Jim's head when you just kind of know he's got to get out and Kadari's got to play the bulk of the minutes like he did tonight?
Yeah, that's a good point you made, Brent. One thing I did see during the game was Joe Girard. Even though he was benched, he was still up clapping, cheering for his team.
No doubt.
As someone who got benched for a freshman, and he was in the same situation last year with Jalen Carey, it's good to see that camaraderie because a lot of guys sometimes they have an ego, and they don't like their spot being taken. But
they do.
That was really good to see by Girard. So hopefully he gets out of this rut sometime soon. He's been a little bit inconsistent. Sometimes he's on, sometimes he's off, but it'll be interesting to see going forward.
And Mike, there's not a lot of guards on this team. So, he's going to play. And right. For those that say Buddy should sit, well, for who? It's not like you look up and down that bench and there's a ton of guards sitting there. So it's going to be some combination. Even in the last game against Northeastern, you saw Joe, Buddy, and Kadari on the floor at the same time when Jim goes to kind of that smaller lineup. I mean, when Buddy struggles, and Buddy really struggled against Northeastern, you can mix things up a little bit. But, Buddy takes up more space in the zone. He struggles defensively too. I'm not, trying to overlook that. But between the two, look, Buddy's going to play. Now we know, though, that Joe is, at the very least, the clock's ticking a little faster out there. But we'll see how that goes going forward. And look, as we mentioned it, Mike, now this team's going into ACC play after Tuesday night against Notre Dame. They need that holiday break. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys can't go home for Christmas this year. Always remember covering those games before they go for Christmas break. And those players that have those bag packed, ready to go, get home, hang out with mom and dad and the family, get some home cooking, and then come back for what would always seem to be the start of league play after that. So unfortunately, a lot of these guys can't go home this year due to COVID protocols, but one way or the other, they need that break, and they need a little bit of time to just exhale, relax, and then get ready for the grind of league play coming. One football note, Mike, before we say goodnight here on the basketball show. This news breaks while we're in the throes of a Syracuse basketball game. Garrett Schrader, who is a quarterback from Mississippi State, he was a big target for Dino Babers and company. They really wanted him in the transfer portal because Schrader is a quarterback who was recruited to Mississippi State. I forget the name of the coach off the top of my head because Mike Leach is now the coach at Mississippi State, but the coach, Joe Moorhead, the coach prior, Joe Moorhead, runs a very similar system to Dino Babers. So when Schrader's name popped up in the transfer portal, Syracuse really targeted him, and we found out the news during the game that he's been added to the quarterback room at Syracuse, which is really good news because they need some competition at quarterback going forward here.
That was a huge game for Syracuse. In 2019, because Schrader, he got moved to receiver this year in 2020. But in 2019, he rushed for 587 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he passed for 1,170 yards and 8 touchdowns. So he's a dual threat quarterback that can get it done on the ground and in the air. And it'll be interesting to see who's going to be that starting quarterback on day one. Is it going to be Tommy DeVito or is it going to be Garrett Schrader?
They needed some true competition in that room. Justin Lamson is an exciting recruit, dual threat guy, but I don't think he's ready. He doesn't even come into the fall. Dylan Markowitz and Jacobian Morgan are just too raw at this point to seriously compete for that position. Schrader brings a little bit more there. So a busy night on the SU athletics front. Mike and I mentioned how great The Mandalorian was, and a quick shout out for the first time since I was a junior in high school, Mike, the Buffalo Bills are AFC East champions. So
congratulations, my friend. I know how big a Buffalo Bills fan you are, and they definitely earned it this year. Josh Allen's playing out of his mind. Stephon Diggs, that whole team definitely deserves the respect that they're getting.
Hopefully more to come. Hopefully the start of a longer journey for the Bills here, but feels good to have that first division title since 1995. New England, you have enough. It was nice of you to share with the Bills this year. So speaking of the Bills, a shout out, if you're watching us live, my friends Matt Perino and Ryan Talbot will be doing their Buffalo Bills Shout podcast live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter coming up at about 9:30 tonight. If you're watching live, if you miss it, you can always check the replay. If you miss this show, when we pop on live after SU basketball games, no problem at all. We put this on YouTube. You can catch the replay there. I always pop it in my recap as well, but just subscribe to Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube and you can watch it on demand. Mike and I put it on our social media channels as well. So please follow us there. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us here. We will be back in just a couple of days. Tuesday night, right, Mike? Syracuse, yeah. Notre Dame?
Notre Dame.
December 22nd, Syracuse, Notre Dame. Mike and I will be with you here on Syracuse Basketball Postgame as soon as that one is over. Doing the thing. Thanks to everybody that checked in the comment section tonight. Good stuff from you guys. And we will talk to you again Tuesday night here on Syracuse Basketball Postgame.
See you guys then.